entire city right now is technically under dispute. 90% of British Columbia is technically on unceded territory. The big banks don't want to come out publicly and say, oh, we're not lending on that land. National house price index is corrected to 18%, which is actually the sharpest house price correction over the last 30 years. There's probably still some more downside. I'm a Bitcoin bull myself. Everybody thinks it's just like a money laundering mechanism, and like the media has almost trained them to believe that. Whether you look at gold or you look at Bitcoin, they're both telling you the same thing.
Today, we're sitting down with Steve Saretsky, top real estate insider, Bitcoiner, and co-host of the wildly popular Loonie Hour podcast. He's also one of the only realtors who will look you in the eye and tell you the truth about the markets breaking in real time. In this episode, we discuss how a single court ruling completely undermined Canadian property rights, making parts of British Columbia unfinanceable and unsellable overnight.
I'm not putting my client in there until this gets rectified, or unless my client's getting a 30-40% discount.
Why most real estate investors are still sleeping on Bitcoin.
I just don't think they get it.
And that Canada is in the middle of its biggest housing bust, bigger than 2008, with sales absolutely collapsing.
25 new condo sales in the city of Toronto last month.
Plus, he lays out the coming economic chaos and tells you the moves he's personally making to prepare.
Shit really starts going sideways. Like, you pick up your USB stick and you move.
All right. Good morning, Steve. Thank you so much for joining me today. Really excited to have this conversation. We're going to get into real estate and Bitcoin and all that fun stuff. But before, I actually want to pick your brain about what's going on in Richmond, BC right now, because a lot of our American listeners might not know. But back in, I think it was August of this year, we had the BC Supreme Court basically have a ruling regarding I think it's the Cowichan tribe having title over about, 300 hectares or so, but 150 privately owned residencies there are impacted. Okay, what's going on with this Aboriginal claim to BC privately owned homes? What's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, like, high level, I'm not like a legal expert, but so I some background context. I grew up in the city of Richmond. That's where I'm born and raised, went to school there. I actually lived in Cowichan for a bit on the island there and played some hockey there. So I'm kind of stuck in the middle, so to speak. But no, like, basically, so like in Canada, I guess, again, this goes back to like the 1800s effectively, is based on like our constitutional law is, you have to effectively do all these treaties. Like, there's like the Aboriginal rights are effectively title to land, right? So basically 90% of British Columbia is technically on unceded territory. So what that means, really, for like just broad strokes for your audience, is effectively we don't have treaties with all these First Nation bands. And so, well, there's been a lot of ongoing claims or disputes over like, hey, this is our land, you need to compensate us. And this has all been going on in the background. So, and so there's been a case recently that was in the courts there for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years or maybe longer, where there's like a section of Richmond, which, again, like Richmond being, the main city of the airport, right? You're 10 minutes to YVR airport, right? So basically what happened was the judge ruled that the First Nations band, or the First Nations reserve, they basically had a claim on this section of land in Richmond, which is basically farmlands and along the river, saying, oh, these guys used to fish there, 100 plus years ago. And so the judge ruled that not only does their right basically supersedes the crown, so the government, the crown right, but it also can coexist. And this is the really sticking point. It says it can coexist with the fee simple. So again, let's just unpack that a little bit further. Effectively, what that means is, let's just say you own a house in Richmond and it gets stuck in this dispute where the First Nations say, hey, listen, we used to basically fish and farm or whatever and hang out on your property. They are taking basically the government's land effectively now, and they're saying, listen, well, we coexist. So they're not kicking anybody out. They're not saying, listen, get out of your house, it's mine now, you're out of here. But what they're saying is, like, the judges said, listen, these two titles can coexist, and now you guys have to figure it out. The challenge is living in the real estate world, which is what I do, is you can't really have a title coexist. You have to understand clear boundaries of like who owns what. And right. What is the ownership structure? Do I own it in fee simple? Am I simply leasing the land on a 99-year lease off this First Nations band? And so the challenge really is today is basically which lender is going to want to basically lend money against this collateral, right? And so like as a lender, you're looking at for a couple things. You're wanting to know what is the value of the collateral, number one. And number two is how liquid is the collateral? Like if I lend my money and I need to sort of get it back, maybe through a foreclosure process, how quickly is that going to happen? And so both of those are basically up in the air. And so again, these lands, in my opinion, are not financeable. They're not sellable. I mean, as a realtor, I'd be like, well, listen, I'm not putting my client in there until this gets rectified, or unless my client's getting a 30, 40% discount. I don't see how anyone can rightfully go in there. So that's the real challenge today. And based on my conversations with lenders, most of them are all keeping it very hush hush, right? Like the big banks don't want to come out publicly and say, oh, we're not lending on that land, because that's just bad PR, right?
Yeah.
And so, but if you know who to talk to effectively, what I'm being told is there's about 10 lenders right now that will not lend on that land for new purchases. So if you're already living there, you got a mortgage, they're almost certainly just going to renew you. It's just good for business, and they don't want to have bad publicity. But if you're a new buyer and saying, listen, I want to buy this place, I got an accepted offer, I want a mortgage, a lot of them are going to find a reason not to do that loan. Maybe it's an outright denial. Maybe it's, I'm going to throttle your loan to value. Maybe it's the appraisal comes in way lower than what you think you paid. So that's really what's happening now. The bigger thing is this has set a case precedent that's saying the First Nations can have claim effectively to other private fee simple ownership. When 90% of British Columbia is on unceded territory, meaning they have not done treaties with these First Nations, everybody's coming out of the woodwork and saying, well, yeah, we used to fish over there 300 years ago. So like, if those guys are successful, like maybe we can be successful. And so, yeah, I think ultimately what's going to have to happen here is it will probably get reversed in court. It has to, but that could take several years, maybe longer. I think you're going to have to do all these treaties. That's going to be very expensive. So yeah, there's just a lot going on behind the scenes.
I mean, like Canada wasn't gulch to begin with, but it seems like that's really undermining property right laws in the sense that if you can't even be certain that you own your home to lend against it. Again, of course, being in a debt-based monetary system, we need those loan creation in order to have more money into the system. Have there been any, because it seems like the incentives are all right aligned that if you have any claim, possibly it's worth putting forward because you might actually get some property out of it. Have there been any other claims outside of the BC area or even more directly in BC that are coming out of the woodwork now that are following with this case?
Yeah, there's actually like a map, but I haven't looked at it too much into detail. There's like a map of like ongoing, someone created it. There's like a map of like ongoing disputes across British Columbia. And so you can kind of see them. And like one of the ones that's ongoing right now is the entire city of Kamloops, which is
what?
Yeah. So the entire city of Kamloops, which is a population of 100,000 people. The entire city right now is technically under dispute. And so again, the issue, the concern is, well, hold on a minute. Like, if that's the case precedent set in Richmond, then in theory that could also and maybe probably should apply to places like Kamloops. So that's the obvious one. I was watching a clip there yesterday. I think there was another First Nations band that came out in Ottawa. They're Ottawa / Quebec, and they came out and said, listen, we've been trying to negotiate and deal with the Quebec government for years. They've been sort of shooing us away. And so we're going to formally submit a title claim. And they mentioned specifically the Richmond ruling as an example that they had watched very closely to say, listen, this has given us the encouragement that we needed, that we should be successful or could be successful moving forward. So that's one. So they're kind of like evolving throughout the country. I don't know if it's confirmed, but I think I was reading it'd be kind of ironic. I'm pretty sure Parliament Hill in Ottawa is actually on unceded territory.
Really? That would be fun.
Yeah. It'd be kind of ironic if that's how it all played out. But yeah, so I mean, long story short, is in my view, will get rectified. It has to get rectified, but it's a real problem. I know that the government is now, BC government is starting to actually listen to people in the industry and trying to understand. They don't even know. These guys have no clue. They don't talk. I don't think they don't talk to anybody. They don't actually I don't know who they consult with on like the real estate side. It's not me. they're apparently now getting in the right rooms. So we'll see how this kind of unfolds. But
because I would think this would also possibly have implications for property taxes. Like if you don't hold the title, why would you pay the property taxes? You can at least make an argument whether or not it's a valid one or be held up in court. I can at least see it being put forward. Or you're not fully on the hook for it as well too.
So there's actually there's a claim right now, or not a claim. There's like a lawsuit going on right now where all those people that were impacted in Richmond, they are actually suing. I can't remember if it's the city of Richmond or the British Columbia government, but they're suing based on saying, hey, listen, like, give us our property taxes back effectively over the last number of years.
That's incredible. I'm not surprised. On that note then too, because I agree that I think this probably will be rectified in the courts. Like it just seems like if they didn't, like if it held up in some sort of way in the long term, I think that'd be catastrophic for across the country. And it definitely would make Canadian real estate completely uninvestable, right? Because you don't know that you're actually going to hold the property anymore. It seems to me, and I want to get your view of what currently the state of the real estate market is like, because I was pulling up from StatsCan, and in BC in 2024, I think it was 19.02% of the GDP for BC was real estate industry. And so if things are slowing down, if you can't lend against property, further kind of putting another brake, applying another brake, that could have, I think, really bad economic implications, not only for BC, but even for the BC government tax revenue. Like, how are you possibly going to fund all these projects?
Yeah, I think it's like, I don't know if I don't have the exact specific numbers, but I think it's like the fire sectors of finance, real estate, insurance. I think it's roughly 20% of GDP. I think in BC, I think that might be even Canada wide, to be honest. But I mean, it plays a huge impact, right? Like rising home values, the wealth effect, the additional spending that comes from people's, feeling wealthier, going out, buying a second car, a boat, whatever, right? So obviously when you have falling home values and uncertainty around the investment landscape, there's going to be knock-on effects that, don't always get captured in those official stats. But like, yeah, I mean, I think obviously confidence plays a huge thing. I think that the real issue today, I think from like the economy moving forward is actually what we're seeing in like the new construction development space. There's really like we've had so much investment in like real estate. Like obviously it's been like this 20-year, even longer, 20-year bull market where everybody just thinks it's just going to keep going up, right? Like that's just what we've been taught. Like our parents passed that down to their kids. And, we saw during the pandemic, right? Rates to zero, the central bank telling everybody that rates are going to be low for a long time to go out and basically buy a big house effectively. And so like all of this and the government coming in and saying, listen, if you don't have to pay your mortgage for 6 months, we'll do mortgage deferrals for everybody. So it was basically like the government basically put like a floor under housing and told everyone to go out there and like blow their brains out. And that's effectively what they did. And so what we've seen now is just like a sharp reversal, right? Rates up. Investors have really pulled back significantly, and the investors are predominantly focused and concentrated in the pre-construction space. So they effectively finance all new development in BC and a lot of Canada. And so as the investment landscape has soured, those investors have all basically turned away. And so if you look at like pre-construction numbers today in Greater Vancouver, I think we're at about 3,500 sales year to date. So 35 new home sales year to date. We had about 20,000 in 2021.
Wow.
So, you're like, this will be the slowest year in at least a decade based on the data that we have. You look at places like Toronto. I mean, they've had record low sales all over the last 30 years. I mean, they had 25 new condo sales in the city of Toronto last month.
You say 25?
25. Yeah. 25.
Wow.
Yeah. 25 condos in a population of 3 million people in that city. Just in the city, right? I'm not saying the
GTA. Yep, not even the GTA.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's incredible. In your view, do you think, because it seems to be like nobody wants to come down in price, that's why the market's freezing basically. Either you can't get access to loans or you don't want to take a mortgage right now because interest rates are too high, you think they might come down a little bit in the future, or that the sellers don't want to adjust. They're still looking at that, they're looking in the rear view, looking at 2022, 2023, and they're trying to get maybe what they bought if it's pre-construction or what they saw their neighbors selling for previously. It seems like we kind of have one of two options here. We're either they're going to have to step back in and put a floor under real estate again. So drop interest rates, make it more favorable conditions for buyer, or they're going to have to go with the affordability kind of crisis and try and allow them to actually correct down, which I don't necessarily think they're going to do. When this market gets unstuck, is it just new demand coming online in your view because we have more favorable financing conditions? Or do you think sellers are actually going to adjust their prices down? Because if I'm not mistaken, even going back to 2008, we never had a correction compared to the US.
Yeah. We didn't really have that much of a correction in 2008, 2009, right? It was about a year, right? It was a pretty sharp reversal. There's a lot of reasons for that, obviously, but which, it's probably a longer conversation, but what we're seeing today is national house prices are down about 18% from the peak. So the national house price index is corrected to 18% from the peak, which is actually the sharpest house price correction over the last 30 years. So we're kind of living through it now. I'd argue that in my view, there's probably still some more downside, right? So you're going to see 20+% correction in national house prices. Obviously, there's sub markets like suburbs of GTA that are down, 30+%, right?
Whoa.
Yeah. So, there's real corrections. The frothiest markets out in the far-flung suburbs that went up basically doubled during the pandemic. Those are correcting significantly. There's real problems there. In terms of government support, I think we're seeing it already from the banks, right? The banks have ultimately been massaging this the whole time, through basically allowing people to extend their amortizations, through blanket appraisals on pre-construction units, which effectively guarantees the price of what they paid on the pre-construction condo so they can close. We're just seeing banks are basically working with a lot of borrowers to sort of massage defaults, in my opinion. And because I ultimately view the banks, that's the bank's collateral, right? That's their asset. And so it's in their best interest. I think you have 5 large banks in this country. And in my opinion, they basically control the country. I think that they have a lot of say in policy. And I think it's in their best interest to obviously manage this house price correction. I'm not saying that prices won't go down further, but I've actually been a little bit surprised that we haven't seen government really come in with really a whole lot of new levers to support housing. Every time houses have corrected, they've come in and basically supported them. We haven't seen that. There's been some talks about we should be extending amortizations for everybody and
50-year mortgages like the US.
Yeah. It's crazy. So we're not seeing that. I think the Carney government came out in the latest budget. They had an opportunity to obviously put forth some policy suggestions and ideas, and they didn't really do anything. In fact, they really basically just said, listen, I think they know that the resale market, the new construction market, I think they know it's kind of toast. And so they basically came out and every policy they brought in was basically to support the rental market, which is they're going to focus on building more rental housing. That's what we're seeing getting built today. And I think that seems to be the government's direction. Let's just build a stable rental market, and whatever happens to the resale market, they're going to let the chips fall, at least for now.
Attention all freedom-loving Alberta Bitcoiners. Tired of the big 6 banks freezing funds, blocking transactions, or slamming your account shut without warning or explanation just for dipping into Bitcoin? Remember the Freedom Convoy debanking nightmare?
The federal government has invoked the Emergencies Act.
But don't let them control your money or erase your financial life. Join the pioneers over at Bow Valley Credit Union, a place run by freedom and sound money advocates. I bank there myself. They are the first and only traditional bank or credit union in Canada to directly integrate Bitcoin via their Bitcoin gateway. If you have to use dollars, why settle for a fiat-only account when you could seamlessly move in and out of Bitcoin? No hassle, no questions, no rehypothecation, no leverage. This isn't paper Bitcoin. Withdraw to self-custody at any time. Insured and auditable, it's perfect for adding Bitcoin to your corporate balance sheet. If you or your business is in Alberta, switch to your Bitcoin refuge at bowvalleycu.com. Scan the QR code or click the link below.
Abundant Mines is an Oregon-based husband and wife-owned Bitcoin mining company making Bitcoin mining accessible to investors of all ages and experience levels. Their fully managed white glove service allows you to own all of your own equipment and earn steady Bitcoin-denominated income without lifting a finger. Whether you're starting with 10,000 or 10 million, Abundant Mines is your one-stop shop. No overseas call center, no surprise upcharges. With one-on-one onboarding, consulting, and help navigating both Bitcoin and the Bitcoin mining space at every turn, you can rest easy while Bitcoin flows to you 24/7. Learn more at abundantminds.com. Stuck on your Bitcoin setup? Unlock expert guidance from top educators. Schedule a free chat at bitcoinmentor.io and get started hassle-free today. All right, let's jump back into the episode.
The rental market, you will own nothing. Gary, I've been hogging the mic. Let me, let you jump in here, sir.
No, not at all. I mean, I'm sitting here in the US of A, so I just, the idea that you could have a government say, well, these people own the land, but you also own the land too, and these two property rights can sort of coexist at the same time. Not in a 50-50 sense, but you own 100% of it, and you also own 100% of it. So it just, from basic logic, doesn't fly. And all I'm thinking is, if this is the case, and we already know the problems involved in real estate, everything involved in just upkeep and inflation and changing the market, all it's screaming in my head is just Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. That you can actually own that. I'm sorry, I mean, I know it's a Bitcoin show. I don't want to jump right into it, but where do you go from here long term? I mean, I there's a lot about Canada that seems nice. Vancouver seems like a very lovely place, but I wouldn't invest my money if I didn't think that I had property rights there.
I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm a Bitcoin bull myself, so I'm with you alongside that. I think that the thing that I've noticed is the change in psychology. I think the problem was almost like people in Canada basically got lulled to sleep on the sort of the negatives, but the risks in housing, right? Which is I don't think everyone really thought rates could go up or prices could go down. I think it's just been that it's confirmation bias, right? It's the last, or recency bias of the last, 5-10 years is what people are used to. And so, I think the big thing that I saw, and this might be a little bit new for you, Gary, it was come back to BC, and this happened in Ontario too, but BC in particular, is you had a lot of people that, let's say a mom and pop, they have an investment condo. Okay. They have an investment condo. They've got a tenant in there. They've had it for 10 years. The tenants, is under market, right? So they're paying $2,500 a month for whatever. Let's just say it's a one bedroom. Let's say $2,500 for one bedroom. That's what they're renting it out for. And, you got a variable rate mortgage, and, your mortgage is 1.5% because rates are so low. And then all of a sudden your variable rate goes from basically 1.5 to 6 in the span of a year. So all of a sudden what you have is a cash flow positive condo that produces, net of your mortgage, net of your strata fees, net of your property taxes, you're making $200 a month.
Okay.
There's no need to raise the rent, right? Because, you've been making $200 a month. You got a good tenant. Don't disturb them. Keep them happy.
Sure. All
of a sudden your payment goes way up. And so this positive cash flowing condo that's $200 a month, now you're losing $700 a month negative cash flow. Which for a mom and pop, I mean, $700 a month, it's nothing to sniff at, right? I mean, that's
at all.
That's going to start really adding up. And so that's what we saw, because the government in BC has these really strict tenancy laws that says, well, it doesn't matter. You can only raise the rent, 2% a year. So all of a sudden,
it's not even tied to CPI.
They basically have been. It was supposed to track CPI, and then what happened was inflation obviously went crazy, and during the pandemic. So actually, no. We can't allow you to raise rent 6% this year or whatever. So we're gonna cap it. They actually froze it at 1 year, and then the next year they raised it to 2%. So basically, as your maintenance fees are going up, as the cost of maintaining this asset is inflating, right? I mean, the cost of trades, materials, etc., went way up.
Of course.
Double digits, and your variable and your mortgage went way up.
Yeah.
The government basically locked you in. It was no. You can only raise 2%. So what we actually saw, there was an initial wave for 18 months where you just had all these forced sellers. They're listen, I can't be losing $700 for the next couple of years.
Of course.
So those became forced sellers that ultimately added to the inventory. And I think that's why we've seen is there's just been so many investors now that have been scarred by that experience then I think now we're starting to hear more and more people that are like, hey, you know what? Like, wow, it seems like people have actually done really well in like the stock market. Like maybe that's an alternative, or like crypto and Bitcoin. Like I think we're starting to hear more and more of that from like local BC Canadian residents.
That makes perfect sense. Sorry, Gary, just to even add quickly, we've done a ton of work with real estate investors out of Ontario, and I think it's much been the same thing, where they've had a bad experience over the last couple of years with their real estate portfolio in the GTA area, and they're coming into Bitcoin. They're looking for another alternative for all the reasons that you listed there. Gary, I'm sorry I interrupted you there.
No, I was going to say, you mentioned earlier about the government trying to use more levers there, but how many levers do they have left? I'm sorry, I did a little bit of minor research before our chat today, and I went on your website and I saw a picture of a home, and I'm sorry to say it didn't look like that great of a home, for like 3-bedroom, 1 bath in Vancouver. Over 2 million Canadian. This is going to cost me over 23 Bitcoin for this house on this small lot that is roughly the same as mine where I live. I don't have anywhere close to 23 Bitcoin. I mean, what is the point? Like, I feel like we've got to be close to the top of this bubble, to mix a metaphor. But like, what more can you do?
Like, I mean, listen, I do like a lot of presentations to like, you know, American investors and stuff over the years, and like, the one thing I'd put like an asterisk. I'm not going to justify our values. Like, the valuations are pretty crazy. Obviously, we're in the inner city. I think Vancouver is one of the most unaffordable housing markets in the world. I think we're like top 5. The one thing I think the problem with Canada is like, it's a really small country. Like, it's 40 million people, right? I mean, it's like 1/10 the size of the United States, effectively. And so, like, I think the challenge with Canada is like, there's only like a couple big cities that actually, like, all the immigration and like all the, like, if you're looking for like, you know, if you're a young person, you're looking for like economic opportunity, like, it's kind of like Vancouver, Toronto, like, okay, you can sprinkle Calgary in, you can sprinkle like a little bit of Montreal, but like, that's it. So like, when you look at like the price charts, like, and I think like Vancouver and Toronto are something like 70% of our national house price index. So when you see this chart that just goes up to the right, like, it's pretty much like comparing like, and saying like, show me the price chart of like New York and Seattle. Right. Which, like, I mean, I've been to Seattle. I got cousins in Seattle. Like, it's expensive as hell in Seattle too. So I would say like Vancouver is kind of like the Seattle. Toronto's kind of like the New York. Obviously, it's like smaller scale. I think there's obviously way more opportunity and higher incomes in those American cities, but that's the equivalent. Like, you know, like if you're if you're a new immigrant, like, there's not a lot of people going to like Winnipeg and Regina. Like, it's just like, and housing is really affordable there, right? I mean, you get a nice house in Saskatchewan for $400,000. I mean, but like, nobody wants to live there. So like, everybody just keeps flooding into like these 2 major metros. And I think that's ultimately why like the valuations are like super supportive, or like not supportive. That's why they're so high, in my opinion. It's partially, anyways. We've got, you know, offshore money. We've got some dirty money. We've got, you know, a lot of borrowing. So there's a lot of variables, but I think that's like the important context.
I recently had to go drive down to the States, and there's a whole lot of nothing. There's a whole lot of nothing in between, you know, Calgary and Vancouver. And there's nothing. I've done this country coast to coast several times. Like, the drive from, what is it, like Winnipeg to Thunder Bay, it kind of just sucks. It's just land. There's nothing there.
Yeah. So like, you know, it's crazy. So like, the second largest, like, or like one of the larger cities in like British Columbia. So you got like Vancouver, then you got like Kelowna, which like Kelowna's like a city of like 150,000 people. Like, that's like a small town in the US. So like, and that's, I think, the big challenge with like Canada is like, yeah, it's a massive landmass, but like, it's largely undeveloped. So yeah, it's I don't know, it's crazy. There's some nuances there, but yeah, I don't know. And you know, like, the funny thing is, I always like say to people, it's like, again, if you're like an American, like, there's no Canadian that gets excited about the TSX.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, in the US, you guys got all these like amazing companies. You got the S&P 500. Everyone's like, you know, got to index the S&P. Like, man, like nobody's getting excited about the TSX in Canada. You got a couple banks, you got a couple phone companies, and you got some oil and gas. So like every Canadian basically just like, well, I get rich or I can make money in housing. Like that's the way it's been done for the last 30, 40 years. And like, that's what people know. And again, I think like, obviously I think that conversation, hopefully starts to shift in other directions, Bitcoin being one of them, but, yeah.
On the Bitcoin note, I'm actually kind of curious. One, do other people in the real estate space in Vancouver are what's their sentiment? What's their vibe towards Bitcoin right now? Because it seems like the obvious parallel. Like if you have identified real estate as an investment vehicle because of the broken money is just sucking up monetary premium, that you would be open to Bitcoin, gold, commodities, kind of the works as well too. But I'm not sure if it still has the negative context. Oh, it's a scam, it's a Ponzi, all that sort of stuff. Or other Vancouver real estate investors figuring out Bitcoin?
I think naturally there's a lot of people that are still in real estate that are like, no, like this is what I know. It's a hard asset. I think people still think it's like this like funny internet money, right? Which is like the uneducated sort of view of it. I think I love it. Like, obviously there's like a generational thing to it too, right? Which is like, you see the older generation, like everyone that's in their 50s plus that reads like the Globe and Mail, everybody thinks it's just like a money laundering mechanism.
Yeah.
Right. And like the media has almost trained them to believe that. So like that's what they believe. And but I mean, I'm seeing more and more like young people, I think, like that can't get on the housing ladder. Like if you can't get on the housing ladder, man, like you're not going to get there by, a 60-40 portfolio. So I think we're seeing more and more young people, obviously, like in crypto, in Bitcoin, like, cause like they need the returns, man. Like they need like, 6% a year ain't going to do it for them. So like, I think that's what we're seeing. I've had a few younger clients, like, basically make a bunch of money in crypto and then sell some and use that as a down payment to actually get in on the housing ladder. Because I think that's for a lot of young people, that's kind of the only hope.
I agree. Gary?
Yeah, I'm sorry. We were thinking about Vancouver. To go back to this, Nathan showed me this website, this game where you could play Mansion or Crack House.
Oh, man, it was the best. I know what you're talking about.
I was blown away. It was, for those that don't know, it's basically a website where they'll quiz you. Then they'll show a picture of a house, and in Vancouver, it'll ask you, is this a Vancouver mansion or is it just some random crack house somewhere? And I got to tell you, I was at about a 20% hit rate. I was getting them wrong left and right. So, I mean, it just gets back to my mind. At some point, there can only be so much that you try to prop this up before it all just collapses. It feels like Bitcoin, you don't need to worry about. I mean, I know I'm quote unquote pumping my own bags here, but you don't need to worry about a tenant. You don't need to worry about, obviously, property rights. And I know you're saying it's just a generational thing, the older generation, but at some point the older generation is going to die off and there's going to be a whole bunch of money left to a bunch of younger folks. I guess I just wonder what happens to Vancouver or just housing in general as an investment when people start realizing like, oh, there's a better place to park my money.
Yeah. I mean, I think Vancouver's definitely been like a dumping ground for like offshore havens as well. And there's
it still, by the way? Because I remember there was a bunch of rules in place.
I mean, it's still happening, obviously, a little bit, but like it's a trickle to what it used to be. I mean, there's so many taxes and regulations that have really choked that off. I mean, the one thing to probably talk about is like, I think as you're seeing now, I think my concern around housing would be obviously like the rate side of it, which is like, hey, listen, are we actually going to have stable mortgage rates like in the medium to longer term future when all this government debt is being issued? Not only that, but obviously all of them are looking for revenue sources. And I think like property taxes is an easy lever to pull. And so that's going to hinder like the returns in that space, right? I mean, it's an asset that you can't move. So you're stuck with the jurisdiction that you're in. But the one thing I'd kind of like point to, you guys like this on like the Bitcoin side. So I always point to like, people talk about like Canada and Vancouver and the real estate side of it. But like, if you look at the money side of it, so What's the average sales price of a Vancouver house when it's denominated in ounces of gold? And it actually peaked in 2005. So in 2005, the average house cost 840 ounces of gold. And today it is at 300.
Wow.
Okay.
So in 05, it peaked at 800, and today you're at 300 ounces. Now, if you go to Bitcoin,
Jeff Booth's favorite metric,
yeah. So in 2015, it was 2,350 Bitcoin to buy an average house in Vancouver. And today it sits at about 8.
Wow.
Oh, okay. Lower
That's
than
amazing.
I expected. Okay.
When you talk to clients, are they like, or kind of just your everyday mom and pop, just everyday either home buyer or maybe like small real estate portfolio? Are they aware of the money's impact on the real estate prices? Like, do they have that kind of understanding of why it's going up nominally?
I don't think so.
Really, still even.
I think there's some of my clients I think that are like a little bit more in tune with that and actually following along and care about financial markets and the economics behind it. So I'd say like there's certainly that. I mean, we have some sophisticated investors that we work with that see what's happening. But I would say like I think it's tough. I think for the average person, I just don't think they get it. And that's the one thing I'm like, listen, like whether you look at gold or you look at Bitcoin, they're both telling you the same thing, which is like just housing really hasn't been like the great investment, despite like nominal prices that look like this. Like you have to start denominating it against other assets. And so, yeah, I think people are always surprised when I say, listen, like it peaked in gold terms in 05.
Yeah, I would have not have thought that far back. That's actually quite a little bit shocking there. I do want to pick your brain about the U.S. markets and kind of macro more generally, but before I do too, I want to get your sense of, because I haven't been to Vancouver for quite a while. I think it's been like 8 years or so since I've gone to the West. But what is the current like boots on the ground sentiment, both towards Alberta and as well around like the EB government? Like I see all these things. I saw you post about a fire hall that had like a record number of overdose calls. I saw somebody throw out there a stat. I don't know if it's accurate, but it was like 73 out of 10,000 homeless in Vancouver. It sounds to me like it may be worse than even a decade ago, but I don't know. I still see like with the memorandum of understanding, we still can't get Alberta energy going west. There's always seems to be like this little bit of tension between BC and Alberta. Is there any change in sentiment towards the current kind of regulation in government in BC? And what is the kind of like Vancouverite take on Alberta right now? Do they still think we're a bunch of just, redneck oil drilling monkeys?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think like if you look at, I'm just trying to pull it up here, but if you look at the polling around support for a pipeline from Alberta to BC or through BC, even like the majority of British Columbians support it. So like our government's kind of in the minority. I think their base is obviously like, the NDP being a more left. I think their base is like, I don't know if I'd say the majority of their base is anti-pipeline, but the reality is the majority of British Columbians support a pipeline from Alberta through BC. So I think the challenge with BC is it's tough. We had like, I think it was like 18 years of Christy Clark, who was like a little bit, she was like more like probably center right, I would say. And then people just got sick of her, like housing exploded underneath her. And that was kind of like the death knell. And then then we voted in the NDP. And really since like David Eby got in, it's been a train wreck. I think we went from like $6 billion budget surplus to about a $13 billion deficit or something like that in the last couple of years. So, I think it's more like he's very ideologically driven. And his view is, he doesn't want a pipeline. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I think that I'm optimistic it'll get done. But I don't know. I think British Columbians are viewing Albertans a little bit more favorably these days. But
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear that at least. So hopefully they'll have nice feelings towards the free state of Alberta when it eventually happens. It's still like, even just Gary, I apologize for the Canadian rant. We'll
No,
talk about the
please.
US a little bit.
This is
It's
Canada
still-
talk. I'm just watching.
It's still absolutely like the election of Carney still absolutely shocks me. Like, I did not think that Canadians were that kind of lulled to sleep or that easily redirected. And for anyone who hasn't checked it out, your conversation with Bloomberg has been unbelievably accurate. I think that was like a couple months before the election.
Doomberg,
With Doomberg,
Yeah.
that is actually like everything seems to be moving that direction, that like Carney is going to get in. For some reason, Trump wants him. We're going to get a pipeline. And we see that set up with the memorandum of understanding, which again, I don't think it necessarily has teeth, but everything's kind of going in that direction. Yeah, you would think that at some point here that there would be enough kind of pain in the real estate market or housing or unemployment data is looking terrible these days as well too, that we might get a bit of a shift. But it seems like no, it's actually because you're directly in the Vancouver area. You're kind of an outlier, being a little bit of like a conservative libertarian leaning Vancouver real estate.
I mean, honestly, man, I feel like I'd consider myself, to be honest, like more center, like maybe slightly center right. Like, I mean, yeah, it's funny because like people on the pod, like we get comments from our podcast being like, oh, you guys are so right leaning. It's like, man, I'm not. Like, I've voted for all sorts of different parties over my life. Like, I just try to look at things through like an economic lens. I'm like, dude, this is crazy. Like, why are we self-sabotaging ourselves by not like digging out our resources? And that was like the view of the Liberal government over the last 10 years. Yeah, I think it's kind of crazy that people rewarded them with another 4-year term. I mean, I'm optimistic and encouraged by the direction the new administration has taken. Clearly, you're seeing some of the wingnuts like Stephen Guilbeault dropping out. And so that, to me, a guy like that dropping out is very encouraging, because that to me signals something. So, I mean, yeah, when you look at like the last 10 years in Canada has basically been like no productivity growth, doubling down on like rampant immigration, 1 million people a year, which is absolutely insane. And housing. And so it's like you've derived all of your economic growth has basically just been like more people coming in and pushing house prices up. And so like that's not going to be the solution moving forward. Politically, it's not acceptable, but also just like, listen, there's no new housing getting built. Like the developers are all on life support. Insolvencies are rising. There's that housing market's going to be very weak for a number of years. So you're not going to be able to drive any growth there. So like the only other thing you have in Canada, like you don't have tech companies, and you're probably not going to have tech companies, at least not on any sort of meaningful scale. And it's like what we have is like our competitive advantage is natural resources. You just this abundance of natural resources, and that's like our conversation that we had with Doomberg, who's I think one of the leading authorities in that space. Like the conversation that struck me the most was how bullish and optimistic he was on Canada like a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
Because I think he ultimately viewed that there was going to be no alternative, that the pain was going to be so uncomfortable that it would force our policymakers to pivot. And I'm hopeful. I think that's what we're starting to see now.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because he called, and I will just put myself in the separatist camp, and I'm fine with that, because he even called that there would be growing tension with Alberta's separatism in the federal government, and that ultimately the pipeline would be kind of the concession to get them to stay. And I don't know if you caught this, but we just had like the UCP AGM like a week ago or so, and Danielle Smith got booed, and a guy who brought up Alberta independence got a standing ovation at the UCP meeting. So that feeling, that sentiment is definitely growing here. I'm not saying it's necessarily representative of the entirety of Alberta, but that tension between our province and the federal government is absolutely growing.
What's your I'm just curious. Like, I don't live in Alberta, so I don't know the day-to-day general sentiment. But like, if you get out of your house and you just sort of like talk to all sorts of different people, like what would you say is the general attitude towards Danielle Smith? Do people is she relatively liked? Is she like very disliked? Like what's the overall broad scope sentiment towards her?
broad stroke sentiment would be like, if you're looking at perhaps older millennial and up, we're looking at like middle class and kind of up for sure. And we're not including Edmonton because that's just a weird orange dot in the middle of our province. Very positive, right? She's had a very positive sort of reception. She was able to kind of really capture, because it was Jason Kenney really screwed up over COVID, and she was able to kind of like recover the brand and continue from that point forward. So generally outside of what I would call like your classic kind of metropolitan attitude, very much liked. There's going to be, of course, within Calgary downtown, within Edmonton, you're going to have some opposition. And I'd even say too, like if you go out to like the suburbs around the major metropolitans, like Cochrane and Airdrie and Okotoks and High River, things like that. It's funny because there's support for her, but there is definitely a push for her to be more aggressive with the federal government. And even from conversations that I have, which again isn't representative of the entire population, but larger than you would think, the idea of Alberta independence, a lot of the times what I hear from this like different people over and over again is it would be nice, but it's never going to happen. And so everyone kind of is in this position where they don't realize that they're all saying the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, that seems to make sense to me. I mean, you're never going to satisfy everybody, right? And that's the thing with politics. I think that the challenge that we have in BC is that we haven't really had like a true alternative to David Eby and the NDP. Like there hasn't been a great, like, you know, what's crazy is like we had the BC Conservative Party, which literally started out of nothing like 2 years ago. They almost won. They came within like, you know, a hair of winning the election. They basically only got there because of Pierre Poilievre. Everyone that voted assumed that, oh, the BC Conservatives is a part of the federal Conservatives. And like, I like that Pierre guy. Despite having like a really, in my opinion, like not a very inspiring leader, they still almost pulled it out. So, yeah, I'd be kind of curious to see. I think EB's on the hot seat for sure.
Agreed. I think one of the unfortunate things is that, particularly even go back to the idea that people don't realize that the problems originate from like the base layer. They come from the money as well too.
Yeah.
Which means that they'll not be open to kind of more fiscal responsibility or more austerity kind of practices in order to correct the ship, because they don't really understand the underlying problem. In the same way that we see like Gen Z, the younger generations, they're skewing there's quite strong socialism and communism there. And it's like, I get that, because the system isn't serving you. If you're like 18, graduate, even if you're graduating with an engineering degree from UBC right now, right? Good luck buying a home in Vancouver. It's never going to happen if you've got nothing already saved up or you don't have someone that can necessarily help you. And so if you're mischaracterizing that as a problem with like capitalism, or mischaracterizing that as like, oh, we need more social programs to fix this, like I can't see a conservative government really winning in BC without that knowledge of what the root cause actually was.
It was like Peter Thiel actually wrote about it. I don't know if you guys saw that, but it was actually like pretty well articulated. I think it was like an email he had sent out to like a whole bunch of I think it was like Zuckerberg and all those other guys. But like basically he was like, listen, like if you're wondering why, like, you know, he's obviously referencing the United States, but like he's like, if you're wondering why more and more of these young people are like gravitating to the left and towards socialism, he's like, it's because like these people will basically, you know, have been denied the social contract, right? I mean, like the money is effectively broken. They have no assets. And so because they have no assets, they're not benefiting from the, you know, all-time high in stocks, crypto, real estate. Like they haven't benefited from any of that. So when you have nothing, you're just going to vote for handouts. And so, yeah, I mean, I look at it through a lot of that lens, like whether you're in the US or whether you're in Canada, you know, I see it. Like I see like, obviously you think about like a younger person, like they're very much in favor of like rent controls and, you know, stronger tenancy laws because they don't own housing. But they don't realize is that ultimately like by putting those in place, you actually disincentivize more supply and ultimately, you know, you choke off supply and you ultimately push rents higher over time. So yeah, I don't know. It's kind of sad, but I don't know. Like, I know you guys are Bitcoin proponents, as am I. And it's just like, you know, Jeff Booth's, you know, I consider him a buddy of mine. And like, I think he just eloquently puts it. Like, I don't think there's any fixing this current fiat system. And that's, I think, a root of a lot of the problems that we're facing.
I completely agree. And actually, we interviewed Jeff, what was it, like a month or two ago?
Yeah.
But the thing that shocked me and like really put me back on my heels was he's left. And I
Yeah.
always very much viewed him as like a very grounded, a very optimistic kind of like Bitcoin monk. And so to see him go like, I got out of Canada, that started to make me a little bit nervous.
Yeah. That's crazy, man. I haven't chatted with him since then. But yeah, I mean, it's concerning. I think people are there still are concerned about the direction of the country. And I mean, I'm sure that I'm sure people in the US that feel similar depending on your politics and all that stuff. But like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think like when you see what's happening in politics and in these like big cities with crime and drugs, and it's like, yeah, it's like, man, it's a pretty compelling case to have like a USB effectively with like a whole bunch of Bitcoin that you can basically pour it with you anywhere you want, like, which is the difference of having like, gold bars. I mean, you can't lug those around with you, but it's like, hey, listen, if shit really starts going sideways, like you pick up your USB stick and you move.
100%, which funny enough, I got two things, and Gary, I'll let you jump in. One, I actually know a guy here in Alberta who did that he was in China during with the beginnings of the lockdown, saw the writing on the wall and took his entire net worth with him back to Alberta in his overhead compartment on a plane and bought a house here. So yes, that is people like, especially people coming in, you get attracted for number go up, but the ability to port your entire net worth with you anywhere in the world by memorizing 12 words is really powerful as like a security blanket or like a fire extinguisher emergency exit if need be. And even just speaking to the crime of the cities too, I used to be a bit of a degenerate punk rock musician back in the day here. I spent a lot of time in downtown Calgary. We would walk from bar to bar to show every night too. The last couple of years, like, I don't feel comfortable being downtown Calgary at night. I won't walk through the alleys, the trains, everything's just completely it's just gotten so much worse. Friends that I used to spend time with, I remember I ran to a friend I used to hop around with, and she told me she just won't do it at night anymore. Like, it was fine. Like 10 years ago, Calgary was very safe downtown, no issues. It's not the case anymore, and it's gotten a whole lot worse. Now, with all that, our American friend Gary, what questions do you have?
Well, speaking of America, I've always just thought of Canada for a long time until I kind of started working with these great folks over at Bitcoin Mentor as basically kind of America Junior. I would just kind of joke about it. Oh, they're our nice little neighbor to the north. And it wasn't until I talked to Nathan and a few of the other folks like Ben that I realized how bad it's gotten. Just the economy, the move to the left, socialism, all that sort of stuff. I don't know how up you are in American politics or American economics, Steve, but do you see any things going on in our country that would sort of lead us down that similar path where, Jeff leaves Canada, is he going to have to move again in another few years?
Yeah.
Maybe,
I think like the US is obviously like it lives and breathes capitalism. So I think like you're probably the furthest away from going like full socialist, obviously. But yeah, I mean, there's some interesting like signposts. I mean, I think like the one thing I'd maybe be like concerned about, maybe this is just like an outside observer, but like the crime and the violence, I think is especially in like big major cities, is obviously like from an outsider would be concerning. I mean, I have people that have moved to Vancouver specifically from the US being like, listen, like I was worried, like my kids, shootings, like, to me is one, I suppose. I don't know. I think it's just like an interesting case where I'm kind of like, I don't know. Like, I think like I'm more concerned about like some of these big cities, like, and I'm saying like Vancouver's the same, right? It's like, yeah. And if you can't uphold the social contract and the money dies or is dying, does the homeless just keep getting worse? And the homeless brings more drug use, and the drug use brings more crime. And is it this sort of self-reinforcing feedback loop? That's where I always get interesting, where it's like, oh yeah, like maybe there's a case to be made that like, you move to the burbs and you get that like little piece of farmland, right? Like it's kind of like the dark side of me feels like that's kind of where we're going.
Agreed.
I hope
Fourth turning vibes.
Yeah, like I hope it's obviously not the case, but I'm like, yeah, I don't know what, like, I just don't see a solution, right? Like the solution right now from governments, whether it's in the US or whether it's in Canada or pretty much around the world, is like more deficits, more government spending. Like that we're just going to keep trying to paper over all of this. Like we just need to get more money out there. And so like in my opinion, like the debasement will continue. Yeah, and that just ultimately hurts like the bottom. It's really like it is like the bottom 50, right? Like it's like that. Like I don't know. I was chatting with a bunch of people this week just on like like this K-shaped recovery, which is like it's so true. Like it's like if you're in the top like 40, like I don't know, I think you're doing fine. Like you've probably owned some equities, you probably own some Bitcoin, you probably own some real estate. Like you're kind of keeping above it, but it's like if you're in the bottom 50, you don't really have any assets. Like you're just getting destroyed. Like food prices are still going up. They're telling you CPI is 2.5%. Yeah, man, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you. When you said before the debasement will continue, all I could think of the debasement will continue until morale improves.
Yeah. The beatings will continue.
Yeah.
I don't know. I want to be optimistic and say like, oh, we'll figure it out. But like, yeah, when you look ahead the next 3 to 5 years, I'm like, I don't see any, like nobody's talking about austerity. I mean, nobody wants it. And it's crazy. We had a city of Vancouver, just funny, like topical, but like for the first time in years, to be fair, there's an election coming up next year. And so the mayor was like, well, obviously want to get reelected. So he announced that he's freezing 0% growth in property taxes. There was like, I think more people than less people. More people were mad about that.
I saw that in your X feed, your Twitter feed. Or
they were mad
these days. Yeah.
People are like, dude, people are really pissed off. I'm like, man, I've never seen people like complain about like their taxes not going up. I mean, obviously they're like, well, he's going to cut services and the library is going to be closed an hour earlier because as a result, he's cutting the art budget. It's like, well, you got to cut somewhere. You can't obviously zero. I don't know. It's just interesting, man. Cause like we've had property tax growth over the last 3 to 5 years, but huge.
Have you had Ken Sim on the pod yet?
No, I mean, I've chatted with him. I mean, he's a good buddy of Jeff's, and
I'll say there's another Bitcoiner right there too.
Yeah, he's a Bitcoiner. Yeah, he got orange pilled by Jeff. I've chatted with him, never had him on the pod. It's funny. I don't think he's a politician. He'll tell you that, but he's just doing what he thinks is best, and that doesn't really go over well politically in many cases. So we'll see how he performs in the next election. But yeah, it's just crazy to see people mad about that.
And it's such a small adjustment as well, too. It's just ridiculous. And even to your guys' point, it's the I agree. I'm not at all bullish on the cities. I think we're going to see like social disorder increase over time. And like just fundamentally, like if you have young men aging in that don't have any career prospects, that don't own any assets, that can't save up, that aren't married, like what investment in the society and community around them do they possibly have? You got to
none.
Yeah, I have many friends that have moved out of the cities and have followed me west here. And I have some that have even gone further now and done the acreage thing. It's like they've got their land, they've got their horses, and they got their kids, and they're happy. And at least if not for even a temporary position for the next decade or so, I think you're actually putting yourself potentially at risk being in the heart of these metropolitan areas.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I definitely ascribe to the fourth turning viewpoint. Like, to me, it feels very obvious. Even like the school systems now, man, it's just like crazy, like what they're teaching kids. And
oh, dude, yeah, I'm homeschool all the way, and I've been a bunch of Bitcoiners. I've had a whole bunch that I've spoken to about this as well.
Yeah,
it's like Steve, when you and I were in school, like it was never this bad. It was never.
I've been finding it really interesting. Is like I'm obviously seeing like more and more of my friends, and maybe that's just a circumstance who I'm surrounded with. I'm seeing like more and more people are putting their kids in private school, not because they want to pay the money or they're happy about it, but they're like, listen, like I can't get, and I don't know. Yeah, I've seen a lot more people pushing into like those like sort of like Christian or Catholics. It's interesting. I've been reading a lot about it recently. There was actually a really good podcast with Grant Williams brought. He was actually a finance guy that was on his pod. There seems to be like a rebirthing of like religion.
Yes.
Which I'm finding very, very fascinating, which again, I think all ties into like the fourth turning stuff, which is like, people are trying to like move back to like anchor to like order, which it's finding it interesting. Cause like, it feels like, I don't know, man, like it feels like everybody like used to be religious, and then like it was like totally not cool, and like everybody like that grew up religious is no longer. Now like it's kind of like, I don't know. Yeah, I find that really fascinating.
That might just be a natural. No,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Gary.
Yeah, it might just be a natural rebelliousness against parents. Like, oh, my
Yeah.
parents did it this way. I'm going to do it the other way, and then it'll swing back the other way, maybe in a generation or so. Who knows?
Yeah,
See, I've got a
I don't know.
different
Maybe it's just
take
like
on
a
it.
pendulum swinging, but I feel,
You got a different take? Yeah.
I do think it is. It's return to optimism and hope. Like we get that from Bitcoin as well too. But if you don't have that elsewhere, it is a message of optimism and hope, and it's a return to structure. I think there's also a lot of implications from people that didn't have the familial bond that they needed when they were younger. So think like for millennials, like think daycare generation, right?
Mhm.
You never really had this strong sense of community. You maybe were away from your parents most of the day, saw them for like an hour or two at night. And
Yeah.
so there is a warmth and kind of romanticism and having like a strong kind of familial tie. And then the other one too, that particularly from the Bitcoin angle, because there's a lot of Bitcoiners that have like the return to Christianity and kind of openness to that, which again seems counterintuitive of like, don't trust, verify, and then it's outright faith. But I was having a conversation with Madex about this, that if you can verify it if you look at it from a empirical sort of standpoint. And what I mean by that is like, I was at the University of Calgary for a long time. I was the hidden libertarian amongst their ranks, making my way up. I was going insane there. But the people that I felt most kinship with, despite me being atheist, the people that I felt most aligned with in terms of like values and morals and kind of outlook, even on economics, was the Christians. And then even as my life has progressed, the people that have the best relationships that I see, that have like, you should never take advice from somebody you wouldn't trade places with. And I see like the Christian friends and associates, and they have great families and great relationships, and their businesses are doing great. And so even if you don't look at it from like, I can't verify the religious aspect of it, but I can verify that all my atheist friends are miserable and doing terrible, and my Christian ones have these wonderful families and businesses. So it's like, there's something maybe there, at least being involved in the community. At least that's my kind of sense of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just find it interesting. I just think I think they're all connected, and we've like, whether that's, we talked about real estate, but you get into like the fiat currencies and crypto and politics and homelessness and all this other stuff. And I think all of these pieces are interconnected, and it's like, yeah, it's a lot to digest. But I mean, I think if you're paying attention, I think it's pretty obvious.
Beautiful. Gary, do you have any last questions? I have one more quick one.
No, I just want to say, Steve, thank you so much for just coming on and being real with us, because you could have easily sat here, real estate is your business, no pun intended on the real thing. And, you could have just tried to defend it at all costs and defend the Vancouver market and spin it. And you didn't. You were just very upfront. And we really appreciate that here. Obviously, your business is real estate. Obviously, you have investments in there. If you weren't investing in real estate, let's say you can't do it, what would be the next place that you would park your money? And if it's not Bitcoin, you can feel free to say not Bitcoin.
Oh man, like honestly, I've got like a good exposure to Bitcoin, so I'm definitely in that camp. Real estate for me is number one, just because that's my space, it's my core competence. But I'd say probably if I looked at like my number two asset on my balance sheet, it'd probably be Bitcoin. I'm still a believer in having like a diversified portfolio, like a professional money manager taking a bunch of that as like sort of like the safe side of things, and having like I think like what I'm appreciating more and more now is just like liquidity, right?
Yeah.
And I think because that's what we've seen, especially like I think the real estate market's shaken up a lot of people, which is like, hey, listen, if you want your money, you want to get it out, it can be really burdensome and really, really difficult to get it out. And so I think just having liquidity, obviously Bitcoin's incredibly liquid, but so is like a diversified portfolio. And so, yeah, I would say real estate 1, Bitcoin 2, and then sort of a sprinkle of the traditional, I wouldn't say 60-40, but you get the point.
Cool. That's beautiful. Thank you, Steve. I also want to echo Gary's point as well too, because I think you're the only realtor I've ever met who will actually be like, no, if things aren't looking good in the future, they'll tell me. Every time I talk to them, it's either it's bullish now or it'll be bullish in 3 months. Like, rate cuts are coming, don't worry, it's going to take off in 3 months. I appreciate the honesty there. Last quick question. So for those that don't know, you are part of the Loonie Hour, and we'll get you to throw that plug in at the end. But I actually met up with your co-host Rich when I was at the Montreal Canadian Bitcoin Conference, and I got a cold card into his hands. I got to teach him how to use it still, so we got to make sure we set that up. Have you ever used a cold card, and do I have to get one sent to you as well?
Man, I don't even know what the hell is a cold card. I've got a cold wallet. That's like
I got the best of the best. It looks like the old Blackberries for you.
That's
so
great.
I'll make sure to hook that up for you at some point in time here. And then lastly, of course, Where can people go to follow you? The real estate side, the podcast side, YouTube, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, the podcast, pretty much on all podcast platforms, called the Loonie Hour. So it's kind of like my passion project. And then super active on Twitter, X. So yeah, just, I'll tweet about real estate, but also a lot of there's a bit of politics, bit of like global macro in there. So yeah, Twitter and the podcast.
Hey, you. Yes, you watching the Bitcoin price movements and the latest exciting news. It's awesome to stay informed, but the real power of Bitcoin comes from taking control. Don't just watch, take action. Head over to btcsessions.ca/learn for free step-by-step tutorials that guide you through every major skill you need to know, plus full video playlists for deeper dives on any topic you like. And if you're ready for the ultimate fast track, scroll to the bottom and check out bitcoinmentor.io for premium one-on-one experience with my team of Bitcoin experts to ensure you get it right the first time. Don't wait. Secure your Bitcoin future today. Hit the link in the show notes or scan the QR code on the screen.
If you enjoyed this episode with Steve Saretsky, please do like and subscribe, and check out the previous episode with Brandon Keys covering JP Morgan's attack on MicroStrategy.